just now, and I'm going to make you full host. So, dude, work away. Everything is in your hands. First of all, actually, no, before I forget this, thank you so much for giving up your time on a Wednesday evening. I think it's fair to say my excitement just slightly got the better of me there. So, dude, again, thank you so much. No doubt there's going to be shitloads of knowledge bombs here, as always. And everybody here is ready with the pen and paper. So I'm going to shut up and give it to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time this Wednesday evening. So what I thought I'd do today is basically just go through some key principles on how to eat like a pro. So a little bit of background into myself. I'm the lead nutritionist at Wasp Rugby. I've been with them for the last sort of few years now, and then also work with athletes from a wide variety of sports through my online coaching programs. So everything from combat sports, endurance sports, ultra endurance, team sports, you literally name it, and I pretty much work with them. So have a pretty rounded knowledge with regards to performance nutrition. And there's one kind of like three underlying kind of principles that we kind of work off when we look at sort of accelerating and maximizing their performance and overall kind of potential as an athlete. So basically those three are, we're going to be looking at their body composition, their performance, and their recovery and adaptation. So these are what I've called as like the major players. So, or I like to call it like the triad of gains. So there's loads of things that go into nutrition. And then when we look at sports nutrition specifically, and in terms of the most important things for an athlete are these kind of key areas. Yes, for sure, we got different areas in terms of looking at immune function, injury rehabilitation, and improving like the robustness of the athlete. And then also we've got to tie in like all the preferences such as like social events and all that kind of stuff. But if we can get these three things locked in and have a really good understanding of these three things moving forward, I think I was just going to offer a lot of sort of value and depth to your knowledge when applying it to your own performance. So I think Kieran would have probably touched on quite a few of these things. Fingers crossed, hope he has. So this is perhaps going to be me just repeating a few things today, but hopefully just give you a great understanding and just kind of just confirm with everything perhaps you do know as well. So there's three kind of main sections today, like I said. So body composition, performance, and recovery / adaptation. And after each section, there's going to be an opportunity to have like a little bit of a Q&A discussion around this if we need to. And everything I'm going to go into today are very much just principle-based stuff. I don't want to kind of turn this into too much of a science class, even though I am extremely guilty of doing this all the time and going off on crazy tangents and stories. So I'll kind of keep this kind of succinct as best as possible, okay? So first of all, like athletes, they do need to be in the right shape for their sport or position. So I think there's a massive kind of train of thought at the moment that athletes need to be shredded. They need to be super low, super lean levels of body fat to perform at their best. Well, it's not really the case. They just, like I said, need to be in the right shape for the sport and for their position. So ultimately, like if we just think of sport in general, it does come down to the power to weight ratio. The lower their body fat percentage and the higher amount of muscle they have, the greater the capacity to produce force and essentially just carry less weight around with them. So every meter they cycle, run, step, is going to be less energy expensive to the body. So therefore, they become a more efficient athlete. But obviously, in some sports like rugby, if they can become too lean and too light, they're going to get pushed around, it's going to compromise robustness, and they're going to get injured and overall less effective at their position. So there's always going to be a compromise and a cost to becoming too lean. But ultimately, for an athlete, we don't want them to be carrying on too much unwanted body fat because it's just going to make them slower, less agile, less fit. The work capacity is going to go down, not going to be, like I said, as agile. So they're going to turn like a tugboat as opposed to just turning on one spot, and the repeated efforts and all that kind of stuff are going to go down. So ultimately, we need to make sure they are in the right shape for the sport position. And when we think of things principle based, this is the fundamental to fat loss nutrition. It is as simple as calories in versus calories out, which you're probably aware of. granted, there are so many social factors and preferences and training factors that go into this, but ultimately, the most important thing here is just overall calorie balance, the energy balance. We need to consume fewer calories than we expend. So when we think of the calories we expend, yes, we've got our resting calories. So this is our resting metabolic rate. So say, for example, for my body weight, if I say wake up in the morning and lie in bed all day, I burn around 17 to 1800 calories. So this is my resting metabolic rate. So then to work out how many calories I need to factor in my activity levels outside of training first. So, am I going to be lying in bed all day? Am I going to be a computer sloth, like I like to call myself, just on the computer all the time? Am I going to be on a shop floor? Am I going to be running up and down ladders all day? What is my physical activity level like outside of training? We need to factor that in first. Now, this is usually multiple of your resting metabolic rate. So for me, moderately active now because I try to do some walking. So it's probably going to be like 1.5. So it's your resting metabolic rate times 1.5. For me, 1800 times 1.5. And then what I do then is just factor in the calorie demands of exercise as well. So am I going to the gym? Am I playing rugby? Am I doing a mountain bike session? Am I doing my rehab stuff? What is the calorie demand of that? Then we kind of just plug it all together and then we compare it to the calories we consume. So in versus out, if that's the same, then we stay the same shape and size and so on. So what we need to do is induce a calorie deficit. So ultimately, if we don't feel like we're making progress in terms of body composition, fat loss, and so on, then we're not in a calorie deficit. And it comes back to the original question, is just this in versus out equation the whole time. So if we look at perhaps the hierarchy with regards to fat loss, when we look at the most important thing, it is coming down to overall energy balance. So a lot of people kind of flip this pyramid on the head and they put all their thinking, all their efforts, all their time, all their money into supplementation side of things, where is a really nice quote to kind of describe both fat loss and muscle building supplements. If they work, they're banned. And if they're not banned, they don't work. Okay. So basically supplements to support fat loss, they quite frankly do fuck all. Okay. Like there's no point even looking at this kind of stuff where we need to be putting all our attention down here. The reason why protein is second on this list, which we're going to cover a little bit with the recovery and adaptation section, from a fat loss perspective, it's just very satiating. It fills us up really well, and therefore it decreases our hunger and likeliness to overeat. So research looking at protein is very beneficial from that perspective. It's also very hard to break down, so it's going to have a greater thermic effect compared to fats and carbohydrates. So meaning that we can eat the same amount of calories from protein, fats and carbs, but we're going to actually just burn more calories breaking down the protein that we ingest. So high protein diets are going to be more favorable for fat loss. When we think of fat loss purposes only, your fat and carb intake, it is just background noise. It makes no difference whatsoever. This is personal preference. Do you like having more pasta with your meals? Do you like more bread, potatoes? If so, you're probably going to have to reduce your fat intake so your overall calorie intake doesn't go too high. If you like having nuts, seeds, avocados, fatty meat, fatty fish, all that kind of stuff, then okay, you're probably just going to have to bring down your overall carbohydrate intake to compensate for the calories. So it is really just personal preference. If you are an athlete and you have performance-based goals and you're looking to perform at your best, it very much makes sense that we have low amounts of fat in our diet, not going to run it to the floor, but keep it lower, and then we're going to have adequate carbohydrates to really support performance, which we'll cover in more detail in the next section. And then we kind of got everything else after that, like nutrient quality, i.e. we can't just eat sort of cereal and all that kind of stuff. We need to have some form of nutrition there, okay, i.e. vegetables, fruits, all that kind of healthy eating stuff, which I'm not going to bore you with. And then when we come into the nutrient time and meal frequency, again, that has absolutely zero relevance to fat loss. It does have a purpose, and there's definitely utility there with regards to performance, recovery, fueling, and muscle adaptation and so on, which we'll cover a little bit more. So I want to keep this section really kind of just concise, because I'm pretty sure you've all heard this before, because we've got a lot more depth to go into with regards to the next two sections. But what we got to appreciate in terms of fat loss diets, they're ultimately a compromise. There's always going to be trade-offs here, okay? So we're going to be looking at how's your performance, both physical and mental, how's your recovery, how's your daily energy levels and fatigue, your freshness, your food focus, i.e. desire to eat, your hungry and your cravings. So generally speaking, the more we go into a fat loss phase, or the greater the magnitude of the calorie deficit, the more these compromises and trade-offs are going to kick you in the ass, okay? So that's why you see a lot of diets fail. People start a diet and they go into things way, way, way too aggressively, and they overly restrict the calorie intake, and therefore it's not sustainable because they feel like shit all the time. So say, for example, just extreme example, if you ate 200 calories a day for the next sort of 3 weeks, you're going to feel absolutely awful, okay? And it's not going to be sustainable, okay? Granted, you get high rates of fat loss, but ultimately your performance is going to be bad. You're terrible, so is your recovery, your food focus, all that kind of stuff. So the idea is to negate these compromises in the best way shape possible. So what we do, research back this up along with a lot of anecdotal stuff, is that I like to lose body weight at about 1% loss per week. So yes, we lose at a nice rate. So if you're 100 kilos, that's 1 kilo of fat loss per week, which is fantastic. But you don't really have too many compromises or trade-offs there. You have some, but it's not too much or not too many. But likewise, you're still losing at a decent rate to help with momentum, motivation, and so on. Granted, you can lose much slower than that, maybe 0.5%, and experience literally next to no sort of trade-offs and compromises. But sometimes from an adherence perspective, when you don't start seeing results that quickly, then you're like, oh, am I getting a decent return of my investment, essentially? So we need to have this nice balance, and 1% is about right. I know GB boxing, they work off about 0.5 kilo loss per week, but I tend to do it more specific to the percentage of body weight, because ultimately people are different sizes and stuff. So that's one thing I definitely would suggest, is if we're looking to pursue a fat loss goal, make sure the rate of fat loss complements both your performance and the rate of progression in terms of how you look and feel and perform, essentially. So I just want to go through that section really, really quickly, not too much sort of depth. Are we all happy with what's covered there? If do you have any questions or anything you need me to go through?
Just wondering, you know, the way you're talking about the resting calories that you burn.
Yeah.
Does that like depend on it? Obviously, like it depends on what you do, like on your average day, like how active you are and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I've actually got quite a good slide to cover this sort of question in terms of how you kind of build out the day. But ultimately, like your resting metabolic rate is the amount of calories you expend at complete rest. So if you wake up in the morning, just lie in bed all day, do not move a single muscle, that's how many calories you burn, just to maintain normal physiological functions, enough calories to pump your heart, all that kind of stuff. And then when you start doing some movement outside of like getting out of bed, essentially, that's your physical activity level, which is a multiple of your resting metabolic rate. And then you just bolt on the calories you expend by training as well to have like your total daily calorie intake. But I think it's a slide a little bit later on that's going to sort of show you how I sort of build up a periodized kind of plan as well. If that answered your question. Cool. So that's one thing we look at, just the whole body composition side of things. Ultimately, they, like I said, they have to be in the right shape for this sport and for their position. So once we've got the body composition side of things ticked off and we're in a good position with everything, then we've got to focus on the performance and the fueling side of things. So when we think of optimal performance, we really think of carbohydrates and carbohydrate availability. So carbohydrate availability is defined by the amount of carbohydrates we have in a diet compared to the amount of carbohydrates we have in the muscle. So ultimately, this is then split into high carb availability and low carbohydrate availability. High carbohydrate availability supports performance, where low carbohydrate availability is detrimental to performance. So I think many of us here, I know I definitely have, been on a low carbohydrate diet, cut all carbs out, and then try to do something quite intense in terms of my training. You'll find pretty quickly that your performance will suffer very, very, very quickly, okay? So when we think of your carbohydrate intake, it's very much dependent on four things. So the intensity of the session or the competition or event you're doing, the duration, the type, because an 18-minute game of rugby is different to 60 minutes in the gym versus 2 hours sort of marathon. They're all completely different, so you need to be specific with the type, and then your body weight as well. So your carb intake is relative to your body weight, just because the majority of our carbohydrates are stored in the muscle, and essentially the bigger muscles you have, the greater capacity to store carbohydrates you have. So they're the four key things we kind of work off here. And I very much use this sync analogy when I'm looking at carb intake. So again, we store our carbohydrates primarily in the muscle, liver, and then in our blood. But for today's purposes, we'll just look at the muscle, okay? So if you think of the carbohydrate stores in the muscle as a sink, okay? So when we start exercising, when we start moving around, when we start running, it's like pulling the plug out, okay? The longer that plug is being pulled out for, the more the contents of that sink will start to diminish, okay? So ultimately, when it comes to optimized performance, we want to meet the body's demands as best as possible. So if we start moving around and we start losing carbohydrates from the sink, it makes sense to turn the tap on, and whatever we lose, we have back in. So again, it's an in versus out scenario here. So when we look at this high carbohydrate availability and low carbohydrate availability, we can very much define it by this cutoff here. So we know that when the glycogen stores in the muscle, so the carbs stored in the muscle, start to deplete and they hit about 50% level of depletion, the muscle can't contract and produce the same amount of force as usual. So you might have seen this. You might have started if you did like, say, I don't know, a 60-minute run or something like that, or a long cycle or something, or a game of rugby or something like that. You start really well, you start really strong, and then towards the end, your performance starts to fade. And this is essentially where you cannot maintain work capacity. So what's happened here is that you started pretty well, and as you started to exercise, your stores started to come down, and you hit this level of depletion, about 50% where the muscle is impaired. And you kind of know this when you just don't have that same spring in your step. You don't have that same kind of pop, that same bounce, okay? So if I had a client that came to me and they're like, oh, Chris, towards the back end of a game or run, my legs just felt really heavy and I felt quite flat, I'd be very confident saying that they pretty much hit this kind of level here, where if they've hit this level here, this critical level, that's pretty much called hitting the wall, which I think we're all pretty familiar with, where we basically just run out of carbohydrates and we start using fat for fuel at a higher rate, which is not going to be as efficient to support performance. So the whole idea for optimizing performance is just to try and stay into this period of high carbohydrate availability. Now, we don't have to be 100% topped up all the time, because ultimately it's not very realistic in some scenarios. But as long as we're kind of like above this, then that's cool. So say, for example, if you're to do a very long event, 3, 4, 5 hours or something, and you don't have any carbohydrates during it, or don't have enough carbohydrates in your diet, you're going to start here and then you're going to deplete pretty quickly. So the whole idea of having carbohydrates during, which we'll cover in a few slides, is to basically just slow down and offset the decline in glycogen depletion. So you can try and stay above this as best as possible. But what we don't want to do, especially if you have a big event or something like that, we don't want to be starting maybe 75% full, because we're going to be pretty close to this 50% impaired level. So for your super big events, we always want to try and stay as topped up as pretty much at the start. So this is where carbohydrate loads and stuff can be really beneficial, just to make sure we have enough carbohydrates in our diet to make sure the tanks are fully full. So when we think of intensity as a carbohydrate requirement, so if you think of the plug here, so if you to do a really low intensity run or event, it's like having a really small kind of plug hole, okay? The carbohydrates will just start to like, just drip out. It's not really anything too strenuous there. But if you're, say, doing something really high intensity, sprints, rugby games, or everything like that, it's like that plug hole has increased its diameter and therefore more carbohydrates can leave the muscle. So again, you need to always think about the demands of the event and try and meet the body's demands as best as possible. But ultimately, when we think of performance nutrition, it could pretty much be summed up by this sink analogy, okay? We just always need to keep it topped up. And when like people come out saying like, oh, you don't need carbohydrates to support performance, we could just go on like a high fat diet, all that kind of stuff. Ultimately, it just doesn't really work that way. Pretty much all research from the 70s, bar maybe one or two studies, are in favor of carbohydrates to drive exercise performance. They are the most consistent and they are the most reliable nutrient to drive performance. In terms of like high fat diets, like ketogenic diets, there may be some utility in them in super low intensity events that last days on end, like your ultra marathons. Those kind of stuff may be beneficial because it would be difficult to get enough carbohydrates into the muscle through the course of a few days of exercise. But as soon as you get into any form of high intensity based exercise, carbohydrates are the guys to go to. They are the most important thing here. So when we look at fueling for the training week, ultimately we just need to be able to meet the body's demands as best as possible. So this is one scenario that I see quite frequently. You may start Monday, your sessions on Monday are pretty strong, you feel good, and then towards the end, you just end of the week, like Friday, Saturday, you just feel a bit flat and a bit empty. And like, oh, I don't know if I can get through my session today. I start strong, but then I just fade really quickly. Essentially, you just haven't met the body's demands on a daily basis, and you've just been under-eating carbohydrates on a daily basis, meaning that you just have this accumulation of depletion throughout the week. And what I see a lot of people will do, they probably start their event or training session or something like that about 50% depletion, and then they just end up just below that sort of cutoff point, and they really have impaired performance. So if we look at our strong sessions throughout the week, we've really got to know and understand the demands of the training sessions so we can fuel for them accordingly. And the way we do this is by just mapping everything out. So this would be an example for a typical training week with the boys and wasps. Not necessarily at the moment because they're playing basically 3 times in 10 days. It's a bit of a weird structure at the moment. But on a normal week, if they're playing on a Saturday, this is how we kind of look at. We would, now going back to the body composition side of things, we split the week into 2. So throughout the training week, we work on our body composition improvements. Is that dropping body fat? Is that improving muscle mass? This is where we do this. This is the main priority here, okay? And then when it comes to the weekend, we forget about body composition and our sole purpose is to perform. What I see a lot of people do still to this day is try and cut the calories on the weekend when they need to be performing, which is absolutely futile. It's ridiculous. Like the whole idea is to drop body fat to complement their performance on the weekend, but you're trying to do at the same time, you're trying to have optimal performance, and it just doesn't go hand in hand because again, calorie deficits are a compromise. So if we're going to experience a compromise at some point in that week, it makes sense to experience a compromise throughout the training week as opposed to the weekend where we're actually playing. So even within this kind of week here, I just still split them, the days, into medium days, high days, low days, high days, game day -1, which is a carb load, game days, obviously more calories, carbs, and so on. So again, we look at fueling for the work required to meet the body's demands as best as possible. And then when we add in the body composition element to it as well, it's all about the average calorie intake at the end of the week. So at the moment in this example, this person here, this rugby player, is at calorie maintenance. So they're not going to see any changes in their body fatness. So if we were to think like, okay, how do we get you from a maintenance down into a calorie deficit to induce fat loss because you carry a little bit too much body fat? Then we think, okay, we're never going to change the performance phase of the week here. We have to pull it away throughout the training week. So these days here, 1, 2, 3, 4, they are going to be brought down to try and compensate for it, to try and bring the overall calorie intake down. We never take away from game day -1 and game day, because that's going to appear fueling and optimal performance. There is an opportunity to take it away from game day +1, but generally speaking, the recovery demands are really high. So we don't really want them to restrict the calories there and just impair the recovery period as well there. So ultimately what we're trying to do is just try and pull it away from the training week and kind of leave the performance phase of the weekend purely on performance, purely on recovery. So then they can set themselves up for a more effective fat loss phase throughout the week. And then when we look at periodizing the days, so again, I split them into rest, low, medium, and high. So when we look at protein, we have the same amount of protein every single day of the week. Protein intake might only change when we're competing, because the idea of protein, which we'll cover in the next section, is to help the muscle adapt, build, and recover. On game day, on the day of an event, our goal isn't to build muscle. Our goal is to perform. So that's the only day where we may pull protein down, but the rest of the days, we keep protein very constant. And then what we do then is we have the same amount of fat on every single day of the week, bar competition, because fat is going to slow down digestion and absorption, and it can create a little bit of gut discomfort there. So we're going to pull fat down on competitions and stuff. But generally speaking, throughout the training week, your protein and fat will stay the same. So the only thing we ever really change throughout the training week is your carb intake based on the demands you have. So again, unlike say a Sunday night, what I'll look at suggesting is just define your weeks, or your days within the week. I've got an easy day, a medium day, high day, very high day, mega high day, ultra high day, whatever you want to call them, and just have different amount of calories and carbohydrates accordingly. So think of like a dimmer switch approach. On a rest day, you can have a few amount of carbohydrates. You're not going to have zero carbs, just less carbohydrates. And then as your training demands increase throughout the week, you just dial it up and have more carbs. So when I build like meal plans and stuff for my clients, I pretty much just start off with a rest day, and then I just kind of use that as a template. And all I do then is just increase the portion size of carbohydrates to basically meet their fueling requirements. So that's just a really nice way to do it. You could just have a baseline to work off, and then this is either just more pasta with even meal, a bagel with breakfast. It could be some extra fruit. It could be some carbohydrates during the sessions. There's a few ways to try and achieve this. So is there any questions off the back of that section? Or can it make sense?
Yeah, well, no, just one question. So just on the carbohydrates, so you kind of touched on it there at the end. So kind of like, is there different types of carbohydrates? So you're just saying all carbohydrates are the same. So you're saying, should we be having like fibers, or should we be having like sugars, fruits, or kind of what kind of ones, or is it kind of just get the carbohydrates into you?
Well, I think I might actually explain that on, yes, perfect. Right, I'm going to explain this on this slide. So, one step ahead. Nice, I like it. So in terms of the sources of carbohydrates, ideally we want to be focusing on, yes, fibrous-based carbohydrates, just because they're going to offer more nutrient value, and they're going to be more satiating. It's just going to fill us up a little bit more. But what we don't want to be doing is having these types of carbohydrates right before your training session, because again, these are just going to sit in your gut heavy, and going to just make you feel full, bloated, sick, and nauseous and everything like that, which obviously we don't want. So generally speaking, I kind of look at 4 key areas or 4 key nutrients when it comes to building like a pre-training meal, and it's very much dependent on the proximity to the session. So as you can see here, as you get close to the start of the session, the more semi-solid and liquidized a meal becomes, just because of the whole digestion issue here. So if you're thinking, if you train, I don't know, after work, so your lunch, for example, 1 p.m., can pretty much have, it can pretty much have everything. So it can have some fats in there, some protein, some carbohydrates, and it can have loads of veggies and fiber in it as well. But as you move closer to the start of the training session, we need to start pulling away fiber. So this is your veggies basically, and we need to start pulling away fat, because again, they slow down gastric emptying, digestion and absorption of your meals, and you're just gonna have food sitting in your stomach. So if we look at, say, if you wanted to have, and that arrow is the wrong way, if you were to have something like within sort of 60 minutes of your session, you're pretty much just looking at carbohydrate stuff only. This is like your energy chews, your sweets, like I love Rice Krispie squares, all that kind of stuff. They're just very much carbohydrate based. And then if you're looking at, say, a semi-solid meal 90 minutes beforehand, then you're looking at some, like oats, granolas, bagels, rice cakes, all that kind of stuff, and some easier to digest sort of proteins, and ideally minimally, so minimal kind of approach with fat and fiber. And then again, as you push out, you can start introducing more fat and fiber there. So the way I tend to approach, say like post-work nutrition, I would have a yeasted meal at lunch, and then I'll start tapering an athlete's food into their training session. So they may have something that's 6 hours out, they may have something like 3 hours out, and then they probably have something about 60 minutes as a carbohydrate top-up, depending on the overall demand of that session and how many calories and carbs you have to play with. But ultimately, you want to start big and then taper down, okay? Just going back to the question of the types of carbohydrates, ideally, when we think of our diet as a whole, it needs to be minimally processed with naturally occurring foods. But this whole 80-20 rule, okay? So this 20% can be used for more sugary-based foods to help support performance, especially when we're eating quite close or even eating during the event itself. And this is where, yes, your gels, your sports drinks, your sweets, all that kind of stuff come into play. So there is definitely utility in this stuff. We can't just be eating Cocoa Pops for every single meal, We do need some fiber in there, just for overall sort of like general health, gut, everything like that, okay? So this is kind of how I structured the meal going into it. So one of the questions that I get then is like, okay, you say to eat 6 hours out, 3 hours out, 1.5 hours out, 60 minutes out, but I train at 6 a.m. So what do I actually do? So in this instance, we still use the same level of thinking. So if you're training at 6 a.m., then your pre-training meal is actually your dinner the night before, or your pre-bed snack the night before, where you have perhaps a little bit more calories and carbohydrates to help support the morning training session. So we know in that time that, or while you're sleeping after your meal, your glycogen muscles will stay full or relatively full, depending on how many carbohydrates you have, but they will not go down throughout your sleep. They only go down when you have muscle contractions, okay? So unless you're doing like a marathon in your sleep, they're not going to go down, okay? But what does go down in your sleep is your liver glycogen, and that's responsible for controlling your blood sugars, and they are then used throughout the night to help repair the body and so on. So all you really need before your morning session, if you're training like 6 a.m., 5 a.m., something like that, is just a little bit of carbohydrate, because where the body will work in terms of replenishment, it'll satisfy your liver glycogen first. There's always like a hierarchy. You go to the liver first, satisfy that to replenish it, because maintaining your blood sugars is far more important than having carbohydrates in the muscle. So if we have carbs the night before, we can satisfy the muscle. In the morning of, yes, your liver glycogen is going to be a little bit lower, so we just have a little bit of carbohydrates. It's going to replenish that first, and therefore you can have enough, you're going to be under like high carbohydrate availability. And your blood sugars are really important as well, and especially in terms of the mental performance, because we know that glucose is the main fuel source of the brain. If you go hypoglycemic, so low blood sugars, you have less carbohydrates available for the brain to work properly. And this is where you make mistakes like cognitive errors. All you have to do is watch a football game, a rugby game, towards like 80, 90-minute mark. This is where you see most of the handling errors. Passing accuracy goes down, passing speed goes down, and it's purely because you have less sugar, less glucose available for the brain to maintain the mental aspect of the performance. And this is perhaps one thing that many individuals do forget about. They always think of like, right, carbs and muscle, running speeds, how many meters that I run, what's my top speed, all that kind of stuff. But they forget about the brain, especially in terms of skill-based sports, especially like combat sports and stuff. If you get tired towards the end, you're not thinking straight and your reaction time drops, you're getting smacked in the face, which is not ideal. So I hope that clarifies the morning going into the evening approach. And this, again, this is like the kind of the premise I work off. So what I generally suggest, if someone's got an early morning training session, yes, have more carbohydrates the night before, but then just wake up, you know, a banana would work really well 60 minutes beforehand, and then have like a strong coffee stuff if you're up really early. And then after your session, have your breakfast, decent amount of protein, and then crack on with your day. And then last section on carbohydrates and fueling is very much dependent on the duration of the event itself. So we kind of spoken a lot about total daily intake of carbohydrates, which is the most important thing. But if your event, your training session is of a high duration, then we probably need to think about having carbohydrates throughout. Again, if you think that sink analogy, if you don't have any carbohydrates doing, it's going to go boom, 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 and then the muscle is going to get impaired in terms of its ability to contract and produce force. So the idea of having carbohydrates doing is to kind of slow down that rate of decline, okay? And the longer the event, the more carbohydrates you need on an hourly basis. So if you're doing anything under an hour, realistically, you just have some fluid and some electrolytes. There's no real issues there. 1 to 2 hours, you look about 30 grams of carbs per hour. This is your isotonic sports drink, so your 6% solution, Lucozade Sports, Gatorade, Powerade, that kind of stuff. So I always suggest getting that one in first, so it's just running in the background. As we bump up into 2 to 3 hours, we add in another layer. So we go to 60 grams per hour. You still have this 30 grams of carb powder mixed in with 500 ml of fluid to get your 6% solution isotonic sports drink. But then we're just going to bang in a quick gel, okay? And then as you go to 3+ hours, we need 90 grams per hour, which is probably top end. You probably look to put like a carbohydrate bar or something in the second half an hour of that hour. Basically, you don't have it all from one carbohydrate source because you're just going to have some gastrointestinal distress there. So I always work off the rule of like thirds. So get a third from liquid, a third from semi-solid, i.e. gel, and then a third from a little bit more solid based like a bar or something. Cool. Is there any questions on that before I go into the next section?
Chris, yeah, please.
Yes.
You said about if you train early in the morning, your evening meal the night before becomes like your 6 hour plus, or the meal you would have 6 hours prior to training.
Yeah.
So if you're training early in the morning, should your evening meal, eat your evening meal later?
Potentially. I don't think it really matters too much because once the carbohydrate is into the muscle, it's going to stay there until you start using it. So if you have your evening meal, like I'll have my evening meal after this, and I'll just sit down on the sofa. I won't move, and I'm not contracting the muscle forcefully, and therefore the carbohydrates aren't going to go down. But if I decided to go dancing or something like that, then yeah, they're going to go down. I don't go dancing on Wednesday nights, by the way. But so I mean, the only thing I will go down is my liver glycogen, but that can be easily topped up just by having like a little bit of fruit in the morning, because fructose does appear to be a little bit superior to replenishing your liver glycogen over glucose, and fructose is going to be high in, sorry, fruit is going to be high in fructose then.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
Chris, just one more question there, please.
Yes, go for it.
To put on more muscle, because I work out also in the morning at 7 o'clock, would I get up a little bit earlier to have a breakfast, or would, as you say, a bit of fruit an hour beforehand and a coffee, would that be good enough? Or
in terms of building muscle?
Yeah.
Perfect. This is the next section, which is going to clarify that a lot.
Excellent.
So we kind of looked at, yes, dropping the body fat. We've looked at sort of the performance side of things. Now it's rebuilding. So this is help with muscle remodeling, adaptation, growth, and all that kind of stuff. So ultimately, when we think of like the three most important things, we're looking at the body fat, the muscle, and then fueling the muscle so we can actually perform. So yes, so we'll look at the rebuilding side of things now. So I'm sure Kieran has seen this slide 1 million times already, but it's also
right to everybody 2 weeks ago, so they should be familiar with this.
Okay, who wants to come online and explain it to me then? So one of the questions I do get asked a lot is, what's the most important thing for building muscle? Is it my nutrition or my weight training? So to answer this really quite simply, the process of building muscle is called muscle protein synthesis. So when we subject the muscle to a load, it increases muscle protein synthesis for about 24 to 48 hours. So this is your dotted line here. It becomes elevated when it's subjected to a load, goes up, and then slowly comes back down to baseline. In elite athletes, this is a little bit quicker turnaround, perhaps in about 18 hours or something like that. It's pretty quick. That's why they can train very frequently, or highly likely because they could train very frequently. So one of the things we look at as well is something called the area under the curve. So the distance between this bottom line and this dotted line here. So if you think of the area under here, it's pretty big, it's pretty good. When we think of protein alone, now protein also stimulates muscle protein synthesis, and this is the other sort of dotted line here. Now, if you compare a protein meal or a shake or something and its effect on muscle protein synthesis versus the magnitude of a weight training session, is completely different. So the whole idea with our nutrition to build muscle, to repair the muscle, all that kind of stuff, is to basically just amplify this response. So if we have protein here, the area under the curve from there to there becomes a far greater, you know, about 1.5 times as much. So the idea is, yes, weight training is far superior for building muscle, but to optimize muscle growth, we need to have dietary protein as well. And the more of these protein elevations we can get along this sort of curve, the greater we're going to build muscle. So ultimately, it's kind of like a two-way kind of approach here. So ultimately, we're always looking to jack up muscle protein synthesis as high as we can, and we're going to try and keep it as elevated for as long as we can as well. So this is kind of like some landmark kind of research come out like, I don't know, like 20 years ago, I think now. But what they found that we need to evenly distribute your protein intake throughout the day to optimize muscle protein synthesis. So to trigger muscle protein synthesis from a protein intake is very much a threshold that we need to hit. So if you think of like a typical westernized diet, this would be like your cereal with a little bit of milk. You've got some protein in there, but realistically, it doesn't do too much to build muscle because we have not hit this threshold. So we need to eat protein, hit this threshold, muscle protein synthesis switches on, okay? Same kind of scenario here with lunch. They might have like a chicken salad sandwich or something like that, has protein in it, but is it enough? No, because it doesn't hit this threshold. So therefore, you could say that the protein found within these two meals are pretty much worthless for building muscle. And then they kind of get home, they have the big chicken, salmon, beef dinner, or what have you, and they will typically just have a little bit too much. So if you look at a scoreboard here, this person here is only stimulate muscle protein synthesis once. So think of the scoreboard, they've done it once. They've amplified the training adaptation once. Where if you have protein with every meal, then, you know, again, scoreboard, you're going to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis more than once per day. So we know that for muscle protein synthesis to be optimized, we need to switch it on, and then it stays on, and then it switches off. So on average, this is about 4 hours, depending on the protein source and stuff. You can get into a lot of arguments and discussions and down a bit of a rabbit hole when we talk about this time frame, but on average, it's about 4 hours. So it switches off. Then what we need to do then is have another protein meal. Switch on, switch off. Another protein meal, switch on, switch off, and so on. So depending on how many hours you're actually awake, it's going to be dependent on how many times you eat. So when I spoke about fat loss and meal frequency, I had the number of times you eat per day. I said it doesn't make any difference at all, like none whatsoever. But for building muscle and recovering as fast as you can and getting a good adaptation from your weight training session, meal frequency is very important. So again, it just comes down to context here, okay? So all the athletes I work with, I definitely suggest an even meal frequency distribution to maximize everything from the muscle perspective. So this is just like a typical day of eating. So basically just having protein perhaps every 3 to 4 hours and trying to get as many sort of protein feedings along this kind of continuum. Say, for example, you get up at 5 in the morning, and so you're like way off the kind of scale here. Yes, you could probably have something simple like a protein shake before, and then when you finish your training session, oh, okay, 8, 9 o'clock, perfect, get another sort of protein source in. But if you're training at 6 and you get up at 5:30 and you're having your breakfast at 7, you know, there's no really need, because the protein meal after your weight training session will be more than adequate. So what's quite cool is when we turn muscle protein synthesis on, and it's on, if you have another protein meal during this period, it doesn't really do anything, because the muscle is what's called the muscle full effect. It's almost like the doors to the muscle are shut. There could be protein and amino acids in the blood, but they cannot get in. So we need to have this process switch off before the doors open up again, and they can have the uptake of amino acids and protein into the muscle to generate muscle protein synthesis. So this is the thing that kind of like absolutely ruins me when I see like people train in the gym 5 o'clock after work, they finish at 6, they neck a protein shake, and they're having their big chicken dinner, salmon or whatever 30 minutes later. The protein in that second meal highly likely isn't doing too much to support muscle growth, because you've already switched everything on with the protein shake. So similar kind of way of thinking here. It kind of depends on the duration that you're awake and how many times we can get protein along with that. I personally, for my preference, I usually train in the fastest day. If I'm training first thing, I just have like some carbohydrates. Because what research has shown is that whether you have first thing in the morning, if you have a protein shake before and no protein shake after, or no protein shake before or protein shake after, its response to muscle growth and muscle protein synthesis is exactly the same. So it's kind of like one or the other, and it's kind of like how it fits in the whole day. I would much rather say that you skip the training protein intake, because that takes a little bit longer to break down and digest, and it can sit in your stomach. So I just say, instead of getting up 30 minutes earlier, let's sleep 30 minutes more and feel more refreshed and more revigorated and have a better quality weight training session as a result. Like if I train at 6 and someone told me I had to get up at 5 or 4:30 to get a protein meal in, no chance at all will I be doing that. And it's not really sort of needed either. And then in terms of the summary from the muscle side of things, one question I do get is like, right, you talk about this kind of threshold response. How much is that? So on average, it's about 0.4 grams per kilogram that you weigh. So it's relative to your body weight. So if you weigh 100 kilos, that's 40 grams of protein per meal. And then what we want to do is evenly distribute, and then perhaps have a higher protein meal before bed, so we can have a more robust muscle protein synthetic response throughout the night. Another question I do get as well is how much protein can I absorb in a single meal? And it isn't really a case of how much can I absorb, it's how much can I utilize. You can absorb all the protein you have. You can bang in 200 grams of protein in a meal if you want, but you will absorb it all. Eventually you'll just get kind of bottlenecked, but you'll only utilize the first 0.4 gram per kilo, 30 to 40 grams or so on. The rest then will get converted into carbohydrates, and you'll just pee the rest out as well, okay? So it's just like a very expensive way of eating carbohydrates and pee, essentially. So the whole idea is, again, evenly distribute, just think about pulsing it throughout the day. And then I kind of touched on this last sort of section now. So I kind of touched on this earlier in terms of like your KPIs and stuff that I look at to see if a plan's working or not. So I kind of use this with my clients just to check in on a daily basis and just to check in with themselves kind of mentally. So I kind of just give everything a nice simple traffic light system. And in terms of sports nutrition and how I can help athletes is basically these kind of 6 key areas here. I probably could add on a 7th, which is body composition. But in terms of this, in terms of your daily check-in, physical performance, mental performance, muscle soreness, daily fatigue and freshness, hunger craving, so your desire to eat, and mood and well-being. In a perfect world, we want everybody scoring 8, 9, 10 out of 10. Everything is awesome, like the Lego movie, and you're absolutely winning, you're absolutely killing it. Keep on doing what you're doing because everything is working really well. If you're in a fat loss phase, and I said we do have some compromises and trade-offs, this is sometimes acceptable to drop into the 5 to 7s out of 10s. This means it's manageable, and that's the key word there, is manageable. It's not perfect, but it's definitely not terrible either. But it's kind of acceptable because you know you can be dropping body fat at a decent rate. If you are here 1 to 4 out of 10, this is the shit zone. This is something you just don't want to be in. So I always say for every issue, there's an intervention. So if someone is here in this kind of red, then it's something we can definitely do to help them get out of it and get them moving in the right direction into the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9s, and 10s. They just got to reach out and let me know, or let their coach know, or something like that. Ultimately, if they don't, it's just unnecessary kind of struggling and suffering. And I see a lot of athletes do this. They kind of go on a diet and they think like, I'm dieting, it's supposed to be hard. I'm supposed to be kind of, you know, in the grind, in the hustle. I'm supposed to be doing this. And also they don't need to, you know, they're just like, just happy being in the two, well, I don't say happy, but they stay the 2 to 3s and 4s. See this in combat sport athletes all the time, boxers. They'll do things really restrictively, drop the weight, and then they'll rebound straight after. That's because that's the way they think that they should be dieting, where it really isn't the case. We should be sort of rocking up here, ideally in the green, but if in the fat loss phase, there may be some orange in there. So I always say to my clients, just like check in with yourself on a daily basis. You know, how you perform physically, mentally, what's your soreness like, what's your fatigue like, what's your food focus like, what's your mood and well-being like. If you're in the shit zone, flag it up with me and we can sort it out. And that is us for today. 55 minutes. That's not bad going for me. That's good.
Guys, what I will say is please take advantage of this right now while you have Chris on screen. So any of the questions that you're thinking, oh, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, this is the perfect opportunity, okay? Because you have the wizard here, so please take advantage of him. But I am going to just jump in with one question of my own, Chris. So obviously one of the big things that I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to say this to everybody, is like to link the physical with the mental. So yes, training plans absolutely spot on, and my nutrition needs to be 100% perfect. But the big thing that you're just after mentioning there is like, basically in disguise, I'm just trying to reinforce the point that I'm saying to everybody, is we need to link our planning with making sure that the non-negotiable training time is set. So example, 5 to 6 in the evening, so that if we're sticking with that non-negotiable training time, we can then plan our meals optimally throughout the course of the day, before and after. So just as you were saying it, I just thought, right guys, you heard it from me. You may possibly have ignored me. Now you just fucking heard it from the wizard himself. So that's why I think from everything that you've just said is just to make your training 100% non-negotiable, just to have that selfish time, so that on top of that you can optimize your performance further via nutrition, not having to make it up and go, oh, I have 60 minutes right now, I'm going to do my training session, I'm going to scoff a Rice Krispie square and then go. Like, to just try and plan it a little bit more during the day. I think that was one of the biggest takeaways that I've just taken from that. So a massive thank you from that one. So guys, if you have questions, jump on it right now. I just wanted to reinforce it that I'm not just preaching this and hoping that it's right. Chris has just said it.
Yeah, like I think a lot of people think of nutrition as an afterthought, where again, like if you had no performance demands, if you just want to drop body fat, you can literally just do whatever you want as long as you hit like your calorie intake, your macros. But if you are looking to perform, you need to add in these extra layers of complexity to get the most out of your performance. Like if I'm just doing a 45-minute gym session, I burn maybe 250 calories. There isn't really a demand there. But if you're doing a 2 to 3 hour bike ride, if you're doing multiple sessions a day, you know, you really have to be on top of your planning just to really support your performance as best as possible. Otherwise, you're just going to tank and you're not going to feel great. You're not going to get momentum. And, you know, ultimately life's just going to suck a little bit more and you're not going to enjoy it. And therefore you drop off and adherence issues there. So consistency is really good and important thing for habit formation. Once you've got one thing fixed, you can build everything else around it and you can do that consistently. If you've got too many moving parts, it's hard to keep an eye on everything. Everything just kind of just seems to slip out of your sort of reach all the time. So consistency is a really big thing. And like you said, daily non-negotiables. Like I have my non-negotiables printed out in front of me and I stare at them every single day. So it's just a nice reminder to make sure I get them done. Because I know if I've got 9 negotiables, I try to think of 10, but I couldn't think of a 10th one. If I know if I implement them every day, I'm moving closer to my goal. So whether it's a business goal, a physical goal, a performance goal, what have you, just make sure they get ticked off. Just something that moves the needle a little bit every day. And they're not significant things. Like sleeping 8 hours a night is not a significant thing in isolation. Do it over a longer period of time. That's huge. So little things like that.
Excellent. Chris, I have one thing there as well, and I just want to raise awareness about this in one sense. Well, I think it's fair to say that I'm known for being a little bit crazy with regards to some of the events that I do, but Ben here as well, Ben has made the commitment that we haven't quite locked in a date yet, but quite simply, he's going to run from the north to the south of Ireland. And I think one of the biggest things about this now is that obviously he's going to implement everything, which is incredible. But what we are trying to do right now is basically just get adherent. So are there any 1 to 3 principles right now that you would say, right, Ben, make sure that you're hitting your calories every single day? Or is there anything that he should be looking to ideally lock in immediately post-training for recovery? Because his training volume is going to just start to skyrocket really soon. I've already briefed him on it, right? But is there anything that you would recommend just do 100% stick with this?
I think, we definitely covered about the whole periodization side of things, meeting the body's demands. That's very, very, very important. We talked about the foods going into it. We talked about carbohydrate intake during. Yes, what you definitely do with your clients is just testing what works in training first, so you didn't have any nasty surprises for the event itself. That is going to be so important. What we covered on my podcast was, you can have the best plan in the world, but you have to be ready to adapt. So that'd be a big thing. And one thing just from the training week, when your training volume starts to increase, your recovery of that session is actually the fueling for the next. So think about it that way. So you can't really just delay I wait until I get home, I'll have a shower, I'll do this, and this, and let 5 hours go by, and then I'll just scoff my face in before I go to bed. We need to be very much on the case of recovery, because especially from the carbohydrate side of things, because the first 3 to 4 hours after a very intense training session, you have heightened rates of glycogen replenishment. So we could basically get double amount of carbohydrates in the muscle in the first sort of 3 to 4 hours after. So that's going to be huge. So if you've got a tight turnaround, if you're doing an afternoon session and a morning session next day, and you're training in less than 24 hours apart, then this first 3 to 4 hours is going to be so crucial in terms of your freshness for the next day. So important. If you had over 24 hours, over 48 hours, you just still focus on your total daily intake. There's no urgency there. But if you do have another session within 24 hours, so important. Think of any kind of cycling event, Tour de France. As soon as they finish, they capitalize on that first 4 hours as soon as possible. Getting a huge amount of carbohydrates in, about 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrates every hour on the hour for 4 hours. So it's about 4.6, 4.8 grams per kilogram of carbohydrates in that sort of post-workout period. And then that they're going to take advantage of glycogen replenishment, and they're going to be at a better and more fresh state the next day. So that's going to be really important for you, for sure.
Excellent. Owen, I'm not going to try and pick on you and single you out, but I know for a fine fact you definitely have 1 or 2 questions that you're just hesitant about asking. Owen is an analyst, and he has all of these cogs turning 24/7, but he's kind of scared to ask a question every now and again.
Yeah, I suppose one question I was kind of meant to say it to you during the week, but kind of on longer runs, when you're getting an hour or 2 hours and done 3 hour on the weekend, but I don't know, maybe it's a question more on hydration and things, but kind of getting salt is kind of on my skin, sort of on those longer runs.
Yeah, definitely hydration related. So you just be a salty sweater, like we call it. So when we look at optimal performance, I probably should have put a slide in this about it, because hydration is extremely important. So I always think of carbohydrate intake, fluids, and electrolytes. They're going to be massive ones, okay? What we don't want to be doing is, if you're a salty sweater and losing a lot of salt, a lot of electrolytes, a lot of sodium, we don't want to just be tanking in loads of water, because what that happens then, it further dilutes your blood sodium levels, and this can be detrimental to health. In some cases, severe cases, it could be detrimental to life. So we want to put some form of salt, some form of sodium in there. So if you just have a simple electrolyte tablet in with your drink, aim for about 500 ml per hour on average, electrolyte tab in there, and maybe just put a little bit more salt on your foods just to help increase the overall sodium content of your diet. Really easy way to know how much fluid you need for a given training session. So you're doing I don't know, what kind of run would you do, for example? Like distance wise?
10K plus sort of lots now. So like an hour to 2 hours, lots of evenings. Yeah.
Perfect. So let's just use 10K for example. Before you run, you jump on the scales in your boxes, basically. Weigh yourself, whatever your weight is. Do the run. As soon as you get back in, strip off boxes and weigh yourself again, okay? Yeah. The difference there is the amount of fluid you've lost. Unfortunately, it's not body fat, it's the amount of fluid you lost. So if, for example, you lose 2 kilos in that sort of 2 hours, now 1 hour or something, you've lost 2 kilos of sweat, of fluid. And all you need to do then is take into account the amount of fluid you consumed as well. So if you consumed a litre, you've actually lost 3 litres of fluid. So that is then your prescription for your next training session. Focus on the duration and the total quantity that you've lost, and then split that into maybe every 15-minute drinking intervals then. And that's going to be applicable for the demand of the session, the type of the session, the climate, clothes, all that kind of stuff.
Excellent.
Cool. And going into the winter months now, from a hydration standpoint, we think it's cold outside, but you still sweat a lot, because if you got a base layer on, you got a fleece on, all this kind of stuff, you create this like microclimate, and sweat rates can still be very high. So just be aware of that as well. That's why I say wear yourself in like say boxer shorts or something like that, because we notice that a lot of sweat will just soak into clothing, and then if you're still wearing that clothing, it could be not very sort of accurate in terms of representing how much fluid you've lost.
Sweet.
Yeah, but definitely salt, definitely more sodium for sure.
Yeah. One thing is
what's the best Rice Krispie squares?
They are the best. They are the best.
Just that Owen was saying that as well, that his running volume has really just started to increase lately, because we're actually getting ready for a 28K run in 2 weeks' time. It's actually 10 days, Owen. I checked it earlier. 10 days we're going to be in Wicklow, running down mountains. So everything will be solidified by then. Guys, just a brief little reminder again, if you have any questions, don't be scared to ask them right now. I'm a little bit conscious of Chris's time because I'm really appreciative of it. But please do not be scared to ask any questions, because he's here to help you get the answer, so that we can make sure if there's any roadblocks from A to Z, we're going to get through them right now.
Yeah, like ultimately my time is yours. So yeah, any questions, please let me know.
Agent,
there, Chris, if you don't mind. You had a chart up there, and it was going through like 60 grams of the CHO, like for a 2-hour sporting event. So like if you're playing a football game or rugby match or something like that. But like obviously as the time gets longer, the intensity might, like, it wouldn't be the same as that of like in a 2-hour kind of sport or whatever. I was just wondering, like, how does that kind of balance out?
Yeah, you've obviously dropped the intensity, but you've made up for the intensity by duration. So therefore, we just need to get more in, essentially. Like in terms of, say, a 2-hour, I'm just trying to think of studies off the top of my head. If you think of like a 2-hour bike ride at about zone 2, so about 65% VO2 max, that's adequate to deplete glycogen by about 50%. So in terms of that sink, if you start 100% topped up, within 2 hours of zone 2, which is pretty low, is going to deplete by 50%. So if you're doing more than, say, 2 hours at a higher intensity, that's just going to come down a lot more. So therefore, we just need more carbohydrates in. If you think of an 80-minute game of rugby I think it was in professional rugby league players, I think it's like Widnes, I think it was, when they started the sort of game, they're 100%. At the end of 80 minutes, they're at 60%. So they actually only got through 40% of their glycogen stores, which means that, yes, they definitely need to carbohydrate load, because if they didn't and they started about 75%, then they're going to end up about 35% at the end of the 80 minutes, and that's going to impair performance. So it really is a case of, like, we don't know exactly how many carbohydrates an individual needs, but it's kind of just going off like the body of research and making sort of educated conclusions based off that. Like, we can't stick a needle in everyone's leg and measure glycogen before and after a session, unfortunately. But as a general trend, the greater the duration, the more carbohydrates you need per hour, with the max being around 90 grams. If you tend to go above that, then you have gut issues, generally speaking. I don't know if I answered that question properly. Yeah. So with in terms of like team sports, you're looking about 1 gram of carbohydrate per minute. That's probably basically work off with wasps. So if they're playing 80 minutes, I know they need 80 grams of carbohydrates. So how can I get that in them evenly distributed throughout that game? Luckily, we've got kind of water breaks at 20 minutes, at 60 minutes, which is absolutely perfect from a fluent perspective. It's solved so many sort of issues. So it's nice.
Excellent, excellent. Declan, I can see you're kind of half hesitant there now. Have you got a question, or are you just like, no, I'm good, thanks? Paul, yourself, what I appreciate the most about seeing you on screen is that I can see the hand going crazy there, just scribbling a load of notes. I love and appreciate seeing that. Have you got any questions there for Chris before we let him go?
No, all good here. Yeah, as you said, plenty of notes, so plenty of stuff to add in and try out over the next few weeks.
Excellent
stuff.
Excellent. Cormac, while you're there, have you anything to add, anything to ask? He doesn't have the best Wi-Fi signal now. He told me that the other day. But just as you're there, dude, if you can hear me, pop in a question there, or just take yourself off mute if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to say a massive thank you to Chris. So, guys, last chance. If you have anything, ping it in right now. I think we're all good. Oh, Ben, you have one there. Come off mute.
It's just about hydration again. Is there like an optimum amount of kind of water that you should be having like the day before of, let's say, a big event of like, you know, running for 3 hours, running 20, 30K. So let's say you do that on a Monday. Should like the water intake, would it be different on the Sunday than it is on the Monday, or?
Again, it kind of working off like meet the body's demand. So if you're on the day before, like all we want to be is like in a euhydrated state. So we're not dehydrated, we're not hyperhydrated. So whatever you kind of that demand is for the day, you try and just have the same amount of fluid intake as well. If you have complete rest, then it's the amount of calories you consume at maintenance times 1.3 to 1.4. So if your maintenance is 3,000, times that by 1.3 to 1.4, and that's roughly what your fluid intake should be on a rest day. And just be aware that it doesn't all have to be water. You're going to get about 20% fluid through your food, like and coffees and stuff like that. That still counts. And then on the day itself, same sort of principles, but then you just factor in the fluid loss via exercise, and you just do that by weighing before and after and figuring out what that is. So the next time you repeat that session, you have more of a prescriptive approach. But when you're looking at, so say you do lose 2 liters in an hour, which is possible, like you're not going to drink 2 liters in an hour, like you're just going to be sick. You just won't be able to stomach it. So it's kind of a case of how can you just minimize that deficit as best as possible. That's what we're looking at then. Ideally, you want to try and hit it completely, 100% replenishment or rehydration, but sometimes it's just not feasible. So if you do have a deficit after, so say that deficit is a kilo, basically what you want to do is play the 150% rule. So for every kilo you lose, you put 1.5 kilos back in over the space of maybe 4 to 6 hours. So if you lose 2 kilos, you drink 3 liters, so 3 kilos over the space of the next 4 to 6 hours.
Sweet.
And probably put some salt, some electrolytes in there as well.
Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome. Chris, I think there's an absolute fucking shitload of value there. No doubt. Guys, I think it's fair to say as well over the past couple of days, my energy has just been like stupidly high with the level of excitement for this. Chris, I rant and rave about you and the high level of sports nutrition that you can bring, as you're well aware. But what I got most excited about is quite simply to be able to see the stuff that I've learned from you over the past couple of years come firsthand from yourself to everybody here and the rest of the people as well that are going to be watching it over the replay as well. So guys, what I will ask for each and every one of you right now, 2 small little things. Could you take a photo right now and could you post on your Instagram or your Facebook publicly to show everybody else how great Chris is? The one thing I will request, because no doubt you got a lot of nuggets from this as well, and the other one as well, Chris, where can people find you most, just to share a little bit of publicity, because no doubt they're going to be seeing you a little bit more after this?
Instagram being the #1 platform that I'm on. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, but not overly active on there. But Instagram is the #1 platform to go to, and everything I post then is going to be on there. And if there are certain links, then just go to the link in my bio for like website, blog, articles, podcast, all that kind of stuff there as well.
Sweet. Awesome stuff. So guys, again, ask that. Could you take the quick little photo there? Because
Shall I put a, I don't know, I'll put, there you go. I'll stick this up.
oh, there we go.
There you go. That might be a better one.
That's a really good one, actually. I like that.
Thanks, mate.
Beautiful. Right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Chris, I'm going to give you an absolutely massive amount of appreciation, as always, as you always get from me. But yeah, dude, again, thank you so much for giving up your time on a Wednesday evening to share your brain with everybody else in here. No doubt it's going to be a massive amount of games changed as you do on the regular. So dude, just a massive thank you from me and everybody else to you for giving up your evening, and yeah, hugely appreciated.
No, absolute pleasure. It's been a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, guys.
Thank you.
Good luck.